And so now we're going to move on to our final topic, which is considering the district perspective. Because in addition to providing some content knowledge in this webinar, we also wanted to use this as an opportunity to build the capacity of our districts, the staff in our districts, to look at what do we already know about students with SLD dyslexia and how can the staff be supported in this area. So I'm going to turn it over to Perri.
Thank you, Donna, and good morning, everybody. I would like to thank explicitly Jewel and Margie for their expertise, as this level of expertise always helps us in the district to guide our new and refined professional learning opportunities for our staff, so really greatly appreciated. Today I was asked to share a perspective. It is just, a perspective with, my experiences at the State Department of Education and in both a large and small school district in Connecticut. I also gathered some feedback from some of my colleagues in the local area, and really just this is one approach. We're learning together, we're changing as we go along, and some of the things that I thought were important to highlight. So the first thing that we looked at in our district was, what do we already have? What are some primary resources that we can use now that we know there are going to be some changes? And certainly there were two key documents that popped up for me as a district director, and that was the Scientific Research-Based Intervention Framework, which is a framework that's focused on improved outcomes for all students. And this is the focus of our educational process. I mean, that's what we want for our students. So I thought that was really important to kind of consider that within the context of everything that else we might need to do in the district. The second key document was obviously, and it's been talked about immensely here today, about the guidelines for identifying children with specific learning disabilities in 2010. It's really been a nice evolution of, providing a framework for improvement, getting a little bit more specific in the area of learning disabilities as there needed to be some changes, and now moving on to an even more refined approach. And as folks have shared here, it's, dyslexia is a complex issue, but we do know a lot, and so I think we need to just take a deep breath and say, here is what we know, and here's how we're going to be able to use it moving forward. Certainly the term alone, and this is how I approached it with, all of my pupil services staff in Canton, has been included all along. So in multiple iterations, it's been there. It shouldn't be an unusual term, but I'm gathering from the fact that it went to legislation that in some ways, somewhere, it hasn't been. So I thought it was really important to highlight to my staff, you know about this. It falls under a specific learning disability. We talked about it in the LD guidelines. It's been in there. We've been instructing toward that end all along, maybe not as specifically, and now that's where the complexity is for us, that we need to get even deeper. In fact, there's even some resources that are on the State Department of Education that talk about implementation strategies for implementing the LD guidelines, which are still very relevant. So you might even want to consider taking a look at that, which we have. The reading worksheet and components of the writing worksheet, my goodness, I can't picture too many revisions to that, because that's really where we were headed when we did the LD guidelines. So you're looking for these particular students, you're looking for those students that have difficulty with phonemic awareness or phonics or fluency. And I think our content experts have defined that so nicely here. So we're going to go back to those things and really make sure that we're good with them. And that was the approach that I took, was really two-pronged, looking at, what in our district is our framework, what does it look like, what do we need to do, as well as looking at, our current population of students with specific learning disabilities. So that's kind of the thinking as I go along here. That's the way it went. So on this slide here, these are some of the things we really wanted to review our framework, because we knew that we cannot do everything in special education, that it does need to be in the general core curriculum, and that isn't easy. I think people have mentioned around here, it's hard work for teachers, it's hard work for everybody, but it's work that we need to do. So we looked at what do we have going on right now? What are things that are happening in our district? We wanted to look at our interventions, our progress monitoring measures. We want to look at instruction and how it was implemented in the core, continue to develop and define our partnership between general ed and special education, and make any changes that are necessary. In the district I'm in right now, I happen to be very fortunate to have a staff member whose title is SRBI coordinator. And I wasn't the lucky one to have that. It was a prior director, but we've really teamed up this year. And, you know, while I'm not with her all of the time, certainly she has many, many responsibilities, we really have taken a good hard look at our special education processes as well as our general ed processes. And we're also working with the assistant superintendent and our superintendent around this, and they know the work that's going on. With regard to this, because I don't want to stay too long on SRBI, although I could stay forever, as folks may know, we have a manual. There was a manual when I entered the district, and we're actually working on revisions to that manual and rolling it out and figuring out a rollout plan so that all staff again see. And of course, part of that is, you know, all the interventions that will be very, very appropriate for our students who likely could have dyslexia or do have dyslexia. The second thing I did early in the year, because I was part of the work group, kind of said, all right, so we know that these students are among our students that we already have identified with specific learning disabilities. And so simultaneous to some professional learning opportunities, which I will discuss in a few minutes, we kind of looked at, as a staff, you know, who are these students? And so I worked with the case managers and actually, you know, made sure that they knew who their students were and started asking some questions of them, wanted to know who they were, who are we providing direct and explicit instruction to of that particular group. I also wanted to find out who are the staff trained in explicit systematic code-based instruction, because these were all important topics that I knew would continue to help us get to the place where we needed to be. So I really just started to ask a lot of questions. And as far as the staff trained, I wanted to know, are there general ed staff trained? Is it only special ed staff trained? Because I thought that was really important, and we are fortunate we do have some general education staff trained as far as explicit code-based instruction, so that was a good thing. But we really started looking at them, and I would, when any kind of professional learning opportunity was, okay, so now think about those students and think about some of the things that you have noticed about their learning profile, about the way they read, the issues that they have. And we really started to develop kind of a, here's, you know, and all the things that were discussed today really popped up, and they came out of the staff. They actually said, I highlighted the oral language component, because sometimes there's so much confusion about that. And they'll think it's a comprehension problem, when in fact it really isn't. So that was really kind of the first step in my examination as director in being able to get my staff engaged in that conversation, so they knew exactly who we were talking about. And it worked well for us in our district. So then, of course, we want to make sure that we're providing these learning opportunities for our staff. And so it really is this continuous review and improvement process. And, you know, just like we have our students in our classroom who are different, and we need to differentiate for their needs, we also need to consider that that staff are at varying entry points, and we need to consider their learning and be patient, but have high expectations. So it's a little bit of a challenge because you don't, especially me, I was coming in new to the district too, so I had to be a little bit careful. I didn't want to make too many enemies right away. But we do need to make sure that we're considering all of our staff needs, not just our student needs in this process. And so some of the practical considerations were really around the identification procedures that we currently had in place. And so, what were we doing in our LD process? So in our SLD identification process around the area of reading in particular, what were we doing? Were there gaps? What were the gaps? Were any gaps specifically related to this group of students that we were talking about? This group of students that were having real significant difficulties in the area of phonemic awareness, phonics, or fluency. It was also very important to highlight for the staff that they do have knowledge base about this, that they are not just, this is not something that is so incredibly new that they should never have heard it before, and making them feel comfortable, making sure that we're continuing to reference to what they already know about reading, and reading is complex. Margie highlighted that. It's truly complex. I shared that same slide with them. This is why our students have trouble. And just really getting their feedback on what they need, and that has been pretty successful, and it's been a year-long process. I think we started this in October. I think what was also really important is knowing, there were some concerns about, now this box will be on the IEP, and, parents may be asking about this, and what we really wanted staff to do is be very comfortable in having some very collaborative and responsive conversations with parents at TPT meetings, that they should be initiating if that is an area of concern. But if a parent initiates and they hadn't considered it to really listen to the parent concerns, connect it to what they know, validate the parent's concerns, and being very data-driven. I think that was really an important component, that you really need to have that, some level of data in front of you to be making, having a good conversation with the family. Because the family, of course, they want to hear that their child is doing well or not, but they also want to know some more specifics. And so really making sure that staff have the capacity to be that person at TPT. So the two areas that really around professional learning at work, the big focus areas, were evaluation and identification, and then programming, which is the most important part because that's where we're going to be able to make a difference. I think in some ways in the evaluation and identification, if we have really utilized the resources that we have and in the SLD guidelines, and in our SRBI framework, that we should be in a good spot around evaluation and identification in determining what assessments, what your evaluation is going to look like. In my former district, one of the things that I was able to do was I actually focused on what a good reading evaluation looks like. And that was prior to this dyslexia legislation. That was just around specific learning disabilities in the area of reading because it's so prevalent. So just even to get to that level of depth, so you're talking about an evaluation that's got a little bit of breadth but a great deal of depth in the area that you suspect, because that's where you want to get the information, and that's the information that's going to lead you to a good program, a great program. So, Jewel mentioned all the areas that you need to assess, and that's basically what we did, was we looked at, okay, so we know the areas, do we have tools to assess? Are they, in the classroom kind of things? Are they criterion? Are they standardized? What do we have? What combination do we have to put together to come up with a way of feeling very confident that we have assessed all the areas? Certainly that core phonological deficit is a huge piece, and so we made sure that we addressed that as well too. We also had to look, do we need any additional assessments? Is there an area that we don't feel good? And I really engaged the staff to come up with a lot of ideas of where they think we need to go. as well as my own information. And then the professional learning or programming piece is really needing to connect with general ed teachers, specialists, district administrators, building administrators, really working together to improve our approaches of connecting assessment to instruction. Because as I said, this is the piece that's most important. And it's also very hard. This is the piece that's very hard because there's so many things that affect us in the district, you know, things that are in place that we can't change, structures, schedules, all kinds of things, but we really need to determine where it is that we do need to focus, and we can't just say, oh, we can't do that. So we work on the things that we know we can make changes in, and then we address those other areas in other ways to get to a point where we need to be. But really looking at the key areas of intervention, making sure we have progress monitoring measures in place that are, as I can't remember if it was Jewel or Margie, you know, we need to make sure that they're actually assessing what, you know, they need to be connected in some way. They cannot be misaligned or an inadequate measure of student progress. And most importantly, you know, if staff need their skills sharpened, if we need to do some very explicit training with staff in understanding this, because reading is complex. And, you know, I think some people at one point in time over our educational evolution thought it wasn't rocket science, but it is. But we can do it, and we know so much already, and we should just be doing all of the things that we know. Fidelity, I know this was mentioned, fidelity is incredibly important. Are we doing what we say we're doing? Because we really can't make good decisions if we're basing our decisions on something that really didn't happen in the way it was intended. And so this is kind of the area that I've been working on, will be continuously working on in the future, obviously. It is a work in progress. It is something that isn't going to happen overnight, but there are so many resources that we have and so many ways that we can go about it, and every district's going to have a different way. So you just have to, you know, decide how you are going to go about addressing this, but there's so many connections to what we already have. It's you know, we're very fortunate, I think, in Connecticut because we do have all of those connections.